Being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. We now have the full facts from the Notting Hill Carnival. They are ugly figures. Arrests, knifings, some really shocking behaviour. It goes on every year, but it seems now to be getting worse. We'll ask, should the Notting Hill Carnival continue? We'll update you on ULEZ. It looks like the protest against it is now turning into a full-scale revolt, perhaps the biggest one we've seen since the poll tax all those years ago. And travel chaos. Brits stranded all over the shop, many having to wait more than a week to fly back to the United Kingdom, incurring big costs and being told there will be no compensation. We'll attempt to find out why. But before all of that, let's get the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Nigel, thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The inquiry into how serial child killer Lucy Letby was able to murder 7 babies will now have greater powers to compel witnesses to give evidence. Ministers upgraded the independent inquiry after criticism from families of the victims that it didn't go far enough. Health Secretary Steve Barclay says he's listened to the victims of the families and has decided a statutory inquiry led by a judge is the best way forward and respects the wishes of the families. It comes as the Ministry of Justice announced the power to order an offender to attend their sentencing hearing under new legislation. Lucy Letby refused to attend her sentencing and hear the testimony of her victims' families. The Prime Minister says those hit by new ULEZ charges shouldn't expect any more financial assistance from the government. Speaking to GB News, Rishi Sunak said he understands the frustration felt by residents forced to pay a daily charge due to the expansion of the Mayor of London's Clean Air scheme. He also urged the Labour Party to explain why they think it's right to go ahead with the plan when families are struggling with the rising cost of living.
This is solely the responsibility of the Labour Party and the Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan and Keir Starmer. It's for them to explain why they think this is the right thing to do, and they should do that. I don't think it's the right priority. People have made their views very clear, and now it's up to them to explain themselves and why they think this is the right thing to do.
Now, EasyJet's carrying out 3 days of repatriation flights after an air traffic control fault left thousands of British tourists stranded abroad. The first from Palma and Faro are flying into London Gatwick, while additional flights will take place tomorrow and Friday. The airline's also deploying larger aircraft on key routes to accommodate 700 more people. More than 250,000 holidaymakers are thought to have been affected by the disruption. James Cleverly has become the first Foreign Secretary to visit China in 5 years. During the visit, Mr Cleverly held face-to-face talks with Vice President Han Zheng and told broadcasters the UK is clear-eyed that China will not change overnight. He also said it's important to maintain regular dialogue as we seek to influence the country. The trip's been met with criticism from some Tory MPs who want a tougher stance against Beijing. And finally, Met Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley has welcomed government plans to ban zombie-style knives. According to the Home Office, work's underway to increase the maximum sentence for their importation, manufacture, their possession and sale to 2 years. Police will also have greater powers to tackle offenders who use them. Sir Mark said the weapons are doing awful damage in the capital. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by simply saying play GB News. Now it's back to Nigel.
Good evening. We now have the full figures through from the Notting Hill Carnival. Now, to give it some context, a couple of million people went to the carnival over those couple of days, and there would have been many who went and left early, and, you know, they might have seen a little bit of aggro, but not too much. And wherever you get a large gathering of people, there's always going to be a certain degree of difficulty. But having said that, I'm afraid the figures are really pretty ugly. 308 arrests in total, including possession of offensive weapons, in one case a firearm, assaults, incredibly 75 incidents of officers being attacked, even sexual offences taking place. It is a litany, 8 people stabbed. I mean, it really is appalling, and the numbers are significantly worse than they were just a few years ago. And can you even imagine being a police officer and being asked, as part of your duty, to attend the Notting Hill Carnival, where you're probably going to be, at best, mocked and at worst, seriously attacked? And think about this. Let's suppose somebody organised a big St George's Day parade that took place in a part of London. And let's say several 100,000 people turned up, and there was terrible behaviour, drunkenness, drugs, violence, sexual assaults. Do you honestly think that the second year of the St George's Day parade would be allowed to take place? Because I seriously don't think that it would. Now, there's nothing wrong with people getting together, but maybe holding this in the streets of Notting Hill, not just because of the violence that happens, but also, can you imagine the fear of the residents that are living there? Maybe we've reached the point where we have to say the Notting Hill Carnival, as it's currently constituted, simply can't continue. You tell me, should it continue? Farage@gbnews.com. Well, I talked there with some sympathy about the police. You know, I mean, police officers, Rick Pryor, Vice Chairman of the Metropolitan Police Federation, police officers being urinated on, spat at, mock sexual assaults. I mean, it sounds like an horrendous job for a cop.
Yes, Nigel, and it's little wonder that my colleagues dread policing the event. As you've alluded to, officers we represent are assaulted, they're kicked, they're punched, they're spat at, they're sexually assaulted. At the last carnival, there were 6 reports of officers being bitten. That type of behaviour is unacceptable, and I would also say that it's unsustainable.
Unsustainable?
Unsustainable.
And by that you mean the carnival should not continue in its current form?
By that I mean every single Tuesday after the Notting Hill, it's the same story. It's officers I represent having to accept that they're turning up to this event to police it, and to knowing that these type of incidents and assaults are going to take place. And
is this, and let's cut to the absolute crux of this, is this elements of the black community who are just anti-police, loathe police? Is that what it's about?
Well, I wouldn't like to say that. I think it's a small, active minority of people attending the carnival who are the ringleaders and troublemakers. And
but why this carnival? Why this carnival? I mean, there has to be some racial element to this in terms of the way a certain group in the black community view the police force in there. I mean, let's remember, the Black Lives Matter movement was about defunding the police. Now, I mean, I don't know whether that was an element here at Notting Hill, but this must be a factor somewhere, Rick, surely.
Well, I don't want to be drawn into that particular area, but what I would say is I think that serious consideration does need to be given to hosting this celebration at a more suitable location, which can be better policed, better security, and can reduce the instances of these type of assaults and behaviour taking place.
That I understand. Tracy Miller's a former gang member, but of course now an author and youth worker. And we've discussed these issues, Tracy, on the show before. Rick was rather avoiding the point that I was trying to make, but I'll be very direct with you.
You always are.
Well, of course. But no, I mean, look, we know that the Black Lives Matter movement has, at its core, defunding the police, a loathing of the police. Is that what this is about?
In my mind, and I think a lot of people's minds, the Black Lives Matter was because a gentleman was killed in America, and it was a case of we've had enough, let's get together. I wasn't there personally myself, but as a black community, let's get together and show that there is unity amongst us, and this can't go on.
Well, actually, the Black Lives Matter movement was supported by a huge number of white people and media organisations and sportsmen who didn't understand that behind the organisation it was actually this really, really, I think, very dangerous motive of defunding the police. But whether it's BLM or not...
That's your perception of it, though, isn't it?
Sorry?
That's not my perception of it, that's your perception of it.
No, it's on their website.
OK.
No, it's on their website. We can argue about groups that are campaigning genuinely for equality, and that's fine, and we support that. But this particular organisation, you know... And what I'm trying to get to, Tracy, is we can go back, goodness me, we can go back 40 years to the Brixton riots, where, under the sus laws as they were known, elements of the black community felt they were being unfairly targeted by the police. The police, in turn, felt they were doing their job.
They are. Even to this day, you can watch footage. The black community are targeted by the police to an extent, and they're ill-treated. It's a fact.
So, what happened at Notting Hill, and what happens every year at Notting Hill, and I did make the point, 2 million people went.
Right, 2 million people.
And many people would have had a fantastic time and wouldn't have seen violence. I get that. However, you know, the type of incidents that have happened at this carnival and others, the nature of them, it's pretty appalling stuff.
Of course.
8 stabbings, people running down the street carrying zombie... It's appalling. And what I'm asking you is, surely this is an element of the black community who just hate the police?
I don't think so. Were there attacks on... OK, I heard that it was reported that there was a sexual assault. That's not good to hear. But were there active stabbings against officers? Were they mobbed? Were there brawls with the officers?
50 of them.
So they were stabbed? Officers were stabbed?
Were pushed to the floor, urinated on.
But you're talking about youngsters that are running through crowds with knives, and you think it's against the police, so wouldn't police have been attacked? Do you get what I'm... Do you see
no. Well, I mean, you know,
so we can't say that.
No police officers were... Hang on. No police officers were stabbed. However, 75 were assaulted, 50 seriously.
I hear you, and like I said, it's not good. But it's not a case... I don't think it's a case of they're there to cause trouble against the police. Black youths are hurting their own black kind. Like, we're hurting our own race.
No, we know that.
So let's look at it for that. And that's what it looks like it was.
All right, fine. Tracy, should the carnival continue in its current form? I mean, you know, the point was made. Rick makes the point from a policing perspective and actually from a community. But if you lived there, I mean, goodness me, you'd been scared. It has to
continue. What else do we have if we haven't got the carnival in Notting Hill to celebrate our culture, the Caribbean culture? Let me tell...
Well, on the 2nd of September, there's a big event, you know, that Sadiq Khan's organised in Trafalgar Square.
OK.
And that is a black event.
But it's not the same.
Go on.
It ain't the same. Now, to be fair, I don't usually attend Carnival, but I did this year. First of all, my great-grandfather, Leslie King, was the first Jamaican settler in Brixton. So it wasn't for him being a guarantor for other black families to come over. We wouldn't have black people in Brixton. And it was the 75th year anniversary of the Windrush. So even when I was there, the vibe was nice. Listen, I was drinking... Not anything bad, but, you know, the energy...
OK, we don't mind.
You know what I mean? The energy was nice. It was a good vibe. And the thing is, I didn't think anything violent was going to happen. Call me stupid, but when I arrived from the entrance of Bayswater. There were metal detectors. I went through one. So how are these youngsters getting into Carnival with these blades, considering there's different stop points, you've closed off certain roads, there's metal detectors...
Yeah, but it could be people living in Notting Hill. You know, I mean, there are ways around... The point here is this.
We have to celebrate Caribbean culture.
That's fine. That's fine. Is Notting Hill the right place to do it?
Now, that could be looked at.
Yeah, and I think that was... I mean, in a sense, what Rick Pryor was saying, he wasn't saying that a celebration of Caribbean culture shouldn't happen, but perhaps if it happened somewhere that was a rather more suitable, whether it was a park or whatever it may be in a more controlled environment, we might get a bit less of these horrendous stories.
Yes, absolutely. You know, we don't want to be party poopers, and in a free democracy that we live in, people have the right to protest, and people have the right to go about their business. People have the right to celebrate and enjoy themselves, and to have events such as Carnival put on. All that we would ask is that serious consideration is given to looking at a safer alternate venue, whereby it can be better controlled by the police, can be safer for everybody, those who attend, and also my colleagues who are policing it.
OK, I think, you know, Tracy acknowledges that that may be something we can talk about and debate. Tracy, I made the point earlier that if there was a St George's Day parade that was, you know, 95% white people and there were 8 stabbings, they wouldn't allow it the next year, would they?
So why do you think they wouldn't allow it? You tell me.
Oh, because we've got this we've got this situation in Britain where we're fearful of doing anything that may be perceived to be racist.
So why do you think that the carnival has been allowed to carry on then?
I think that the police are, and the government are scared that if they act against it, it'll be seen to be racism and it will antagonise some of the black community.
But then we have officers killing black youths via gunshots. That's way worse.
Where?
Brixton Hill. A gentleman was shot in the head in his car.
Yeah.
So there's things that happen that are like, oh my God, what the hell has gone on there? We can't put it down to, if we stop the carnival, then that's going to be the worst thing that can be done. That particular gentleman wasn't necessarily
up to much good at the time that it happened. And
How do you know that? Where's the evidence for this?
You know, that's one incident. You know, we're talking about policing on a very large scale.
It's not just one incident.
How do we mend? Can we... OK, here's the real key question, Tracy, for you, who understands this issue very well, cares about it hugely.
And listen,
How do we mend relations between the police and the black community?
Like I said, when it comes to police, even just being stop and search, we've spoken about stop and search before. I understand it happens. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen. Yes, there are youngsters walking around with knives and they shouldn't have knives, they shouldn't have guns, but it's the way it's done. You guys need to bridge that gap. Not you.
Not me, hang on, I'm in the middle of this, but I'm going to go to Rick in a moment, I promise you.
Rick, as an officer, it's for your team to sit down and decide how you're going to do that. I've mentioned biases before, conscious, unconscious biases. People, I've read your viewers' comments, they think I'm bringing race. It's not about the race card for me. Black people, we've already lost there. Our ancestors were slaves. I sit here next to you as a lady that doesn't even look like original African. I'm mixed up.
We're sitting here in 2023.
Why?
All right, we're sitting here in 2023. Rick, you've heard this story 1,000 times.
Yeah.
You've heard this story 1,000 times. And you could hear it in America too. Perhaps with more justification. But can we mend this?
Listen, I think we've come on leaps and bounds, to be honest. Well, I've got 28 odd years in the Metropolitan Police Service, and I think the way that we look at policing communities now has improved leaps and bounds to what it was when I first joined. We've drastically increased the diversity of our workforce in terms of representation, and I think that's an important thing for them to have done. And so, you know, it's always improving in that matter.
Thank you to both of you. It's a debate, I suspect, we'll be having at exactly the same time this time next year. I hope we don't. In a moment, a different issue, but it is about the law. It's about really quite big law breaking that is going on the outskirts of London. And it is ULEZ cameras being damaged, being taken down. There is a full-scale revolt on. It may well be the biggest one we've seen since the poll tax riots 30 years ago. In a moment, we'll talk all things ULEZ.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
So, should the Notting Hill Carnival continue as is? Well, Ryan says to me, it should be scrapped immediately. The so-called carnival has become nothing more than an excuse for crooks and gangs to run riot. Yes, Ryan. Also, let's be fair, a lot of people do go and have a good time and don't break the law. Robert says Carnival should be terminated in its current format. Put it in a park, not on the streets of London. And Paul says the Notting Hill Carnival should continue, but there needs to be an appropriate deterrent. I think that Robert's right, and I think actually there was some agreement on both sides of that spirited debate before the break, that actually let's hold it somewhere differently. Let's hold it at a park, somewhere that's a little bit more of a controlled environment. Now, yesterday, as I was travelling through South London, and by the way, I was a long way away from the boundary, don't think the ULEZ extension is just for people coming in and out of the outskirts of London. No, it's for those that live within it. So if your car is not compliant and you drive round the corner to get a newspaper, it'll be £12.50. And here I was in South London yesterday watching the cameras being assembled. Now, it seems to me there must be huge numbers of people involved in this because it's something like 2,800 ULEZ extension cameras are going up. But of course, they're being attacked at the most extraordinary rate. We saw yesterday cameras like this in Orpington that have been spray painted. A lot of cameras on big main roads, that has happened too. And on some other roads, fairly extraordinarily, what appears to have happened is they're actually being cut down. This one has been cut off at the base and they've chucked concrete in it. I mean, it is pretty extraordinary stuff. We did our live show from Cudham last night, the furthest point from central London that has these ULEZ cameras. And I think the real upset and anger in the audience was palpable. As I say, perhaps it's the nearest thing I've seen to the anger that many felt over the poll tax going way back to 1990. Now, I was told in my first week as a member of the European Parliament back in 1999 that lawmakers must not be lawbreakers. And I've never, ever forgotten that. You cannot, as a lawmaker, it seems to me, advocate breaking the law. And yet, and this was astonishing, I thought, the former Conservative Party leader, Ian Duncan Smith, said he was happy
for the residents of Chingford and Woodford Green constituency to vandalise devices because they had been lied to. He said a lot of people in my constituency have been cementing up the cameras or putting plastic bags over them. I'm happy for them to do it because they are facing an imposition that no one wants and they have been lied to about. The actions you are seeing show how angry people are at what is being imposed on them. Sadiq Khan has gerrymandered all the information. People have had enough. Well, I tell you what, people have had enough. But it's a big surprise when a former leader of the Conservative Party says breaking the law in my constituency is OK. It shows the level of anger. Ian Taylor is director of the Alliance of British Drivers. And Ian, you were with us last night with that crowd.
I was.
In Cudham, you've been a campaigner on motoring issues for many, many years. And there are lots of contentious issues around driving that get us very heated. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No, they were pretty worked up, I have to say. But they made it very clear. And possibly with reason. I was surprised to hear about Ian Duncan Smith today.
So was I.
It puts me in a slightly awkward position because I have always, and indeed so has my organisation, said that we will not actually tell people to break the law and condone it.
And yet a senior British politician today has done that.
Well, yes. Now, obviously, we all have little private thoughts of our own on this, and there's a part of us that doesn't blame them because we realise they've been driven to it. Hopefully, the fact that this vandalisation has taken place, because we had similar things with some speed cameras years ago as well.
We did.
But hopefully it might get home to the mayor and his people just what the strength of feeling is and make them have second thoughts. I think they think it's plain sailing because they won their legal challenge.
Yes, that was the 5 councils, wasn't it?
Yes.
That took the challenge.
Yes.
And then the government could have challenged them under Article 143 of the Greater London Act, but chose not to. So is the legal route now finished?
Well, I fear it may be, but possibly not, because there is a second legal challenge, this one not from councils, but from private individuals. It has been accepted as worth hearing. What the result will be, who knows, and it will take a while. Meanwhile, the zone's...
And this is over the signage, isn't it? This is over the signage. I mean, really interesting that a case was won just the other day. And I guess if it can be really proved that the fact there are no signs coming into the ULEZ zone because the councils outside won't cooperate, and the signs inside the zone don't actually tell you what it's going to be, that we could get a lot of fines that are knocked back. But ultimately, they could just change the signs, couldn't they?
Well, yeah, there are signs in a few places because they have gone up on national highways roads, strategic roads. Also, this second challenge, I think it is to do with consultation procedure as well.
OK.
He didn't quite do as he should have done. Well, we'll have to wait and see on that, though.
But, yeah, you know, when I look at it, we've got 20-mile-an-hour zones, which may be fine at school time, but strike me as being absolutely crackers at 2 o'clock in the morning on the embankment.
Who hires a lollipop lady 24/7?
I mean, all of that. Wales about to introduce 20-mile-an-hour zones in pretty much every town, village across the whole of Wales. Low-traffic neighbourhoods where local councils just literally just block off the end of roads. Here's an idea for ULEZ, right? ULEZ, we're told, is to stop certain nitrous oxide, particulate problems, emissions going into the atmosphere. But any car over 3 years old has to have an MOT every single year. So why not just say there is a standard that cars have to pass, and if they pass it at MOT, it doesn't matter whether they're 5 years old or 25 years old. Yeah. Wouldn't that solve the problem?
I think it would, because that should give you, if you pass your MOT, the right to drive your vehicle on the public road.
Yeah.
Not any public road except what a local mayor decides you shouldn't.
Well, yeah. No, that's a very good point. And actually, isn't it funny with devolution, bringing power closer to the people, but the Mayor of London is making decisions that affect huge numbers of people that don't even live in Greater London.
Well, devolution is a two-edged sword. It brings accountability more local, but at the same time, it creates more bureaucracy that wants to justify its existence. So
And it affects people outside the zone.
And of course, the more administrations you have, the more it costs.
I have a feeling, Ian, and I have a feeling for the Alliance of British Drivers, that the issue of motoring is going to be very, very big at the next general election. This story is not going away. Thank you.
We hope so.
No, I think that probably is okay. Thank you. And there we are, folks. It's dead simple. If you want to improve air quality in Greater London, Mayor Khan, you do it through the annual MOT, and there you have a standard, an emission standard that every car has to meet. Just to say that because your diesel car is over 10 years old, that you have to pay £12.50 a day, has nothing to do with the environment whatsoever. It's all about tax and control. And I'd love the Mayor's office, please, to respond to this. I'll put this question in writing to them, and let's see what the response is. Now, for the first time in 5 years, a British Foreign Secretary, cleverly, has gone out to China to meet the big bosses. In a moment, we'll find out, is he really there to ask the right questions, or is he simply kowtowing to a horrible, brutal regime?
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Well, a couple of months ago, the American Secretary of State went to Beijing to meet the Chinese bosses, and here we are, I think, rather following in the footsteps of the American, but yeah, James Cleverly, our Foreign Secretary, has been in Beijing today, meeting his counterpart, and it's the first time in 5 years that we've been there
in Beijing. Now, there's been plenty of debate about this, and debate within the Conservative Party. Many people who think it's absolutely right and proper that you always keep talking to people, even if you disagree with them, and that, of course, there are considerable trade and financial interests between the two of us. Others, it's that Sir Ian Duncan Smith again, he really is in the news a bit these days, leading the charge saying, well, basically, this is simply appeasement of the regime. Now, cleverly has said that he raised directly the issues of the 1 million Uyghur Muslims who are effectively being held in detention, that he raised various human rights issues, and indeed that he raised the question of Hong Kong. I wonder how much Taiwan was actually discussed, because I'm quite fearful for what might happen there next year. But it is to Hong Kong that I think we have to look, just to raise a concern about Hong Kong, given that the Chinese government have broken every agreement with us, strikes me as frankly not being quite good enough. Benedict Rogers is CEO and co-founder of Hong Kong Watch and a friend of this programme. Benedict, first off, can you really work out what British government policy towards China is?
No, I think it's an extremely confusing position. It's sending out a lot of mixed messages. I mean, James cleverly, on the one hand, is saying some of the right things on human rights issues. The question is to what extent, in what depth. But on the other hand, he talked today about having I think his words were a sensible, pragmatic working relationship. Yeah. How can you have that relationship with a regime that's committing genocide?
Well, I mean, when he says he raised the issues, it feels a little bit like, well, I ticked that box, I've raised that.
Yeah,
let's forget about that and then talk about money.
Yes.
Is rather how it feels to me.
Absolutely. And in relation to Hong Kong, let's remember this is a regime that has completely broken and trashed an international treaty.
Would you just briefly remind GB News viewers and listeners what the agreement was?
Absolutely. So in 1984, Margaret Thatcher signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration with her counterpart at the time, which was to pave the way for the handover of Hong Kong. And in that agreement, Deng Xiaoping had come up with the concept of one country, two systems. So the idea that after the handover, China would have sovereignty, but Hong Kong would have a very high degree of autonomy. Yep. And crucially, its basic way of life, its basic freedoms as one of the most open, freest cities in Asia would be guaranteed for at least 50 years from the time of the handover. And here we are halfway through that 50-year period, and all freedoms have been completely dismantled in Hong Kong.
So they've broken their word, they've broken their treaty agreement. Do we really get upset about this as a British government? Or do we just say, no, it's no problem? We'll just say to 3 million British overseas nationals, if you've had enough, just come and live here.
Well, I would give the British government credit for that BNO policy, because I think that has offered a lifeline to those who need to get out, and Hong Kong Watch advocated for that policy. But we mustn't let the British government get away with thinking that that's all they need to do. They should be... For example, the US has placed sanctions in response to what's happened in Hong Kong. We've done nothing. And crucially, and this I think would be of particular interest to you, HSBC has frozen the bank accounts of a number of pro-democracy activists and political parties in Hong Kong. I know you've had a similar challenge. And also, some of the major pension fund providers have denied Hong Kongers who are leaving Hong Kong access to their hard-earned pension savings on the instruction of the Hong Kong authorities. Yeah.
So what would you want the British Home Secretary to do, Benedict?
Well, I would have wanted him to take a much more... I don't object necessarily to him going, because I do agree that you can't just ignore one of the world's major superpowers. No. So the question is not do we engage, it's how to engage, in what way and at what time. I question the timing of the visit, coming just a month or so after 8 exiled Hong Kong activists, 3 of whom live in this country, were issued with arrest warrants and bounties by the Hong Kong government. But nevertheless, I think if he was going to go, he should have been much more robust. He shouldn't have talked about a sensible, pragmatic working relationship. He should have said, you need to honour your...
And this under a Prime Minister who, when he campaigned to be leader of the Conservative Party, made it clear that China was a threat, He doesn't use that word anymore, does he?
He doesn't. I think it's actually banned within the Foreign Office, I've heard.
I think it is too. Benedict, as ever, thank you for coming in. And it's just a reminder, folks, that this was a solemn agreement between us and the Chinese, and until 2047, it was supposed to have in Hong Kong a great degree of autonomy. It has completely and utterly gone. Now, the What the Farage moment. You saw last week, I showed you a clip of Vivek Ramaswamy at the Iowa State Fair, and there he was on stage, and he was rapping away, something apparently that he's really rather fond of, and doing Eminem songs. Well, there's always a great danger with any political figure to advocate for a record, to advocate for a band, because invariably the band comes back and says, this isn't good enough, and Eminem's lawyers have been in touch with Mr. Ramaswamy saying, cease and desist. Please do not do this again, under threat, of legal action. And, I have to say, it's happened to me. I remember choosing a piece of music for a party conference, and then the band disown you, and it's all over the Guardian and Daily Mirror, and there we are. Now, as you know, this channel is very proud of the fact that we managed to take 250,000 signatures to number 11 Downing Street the other week to say, don't kill cash. And we did get, to be fair, we did get from the Chancellor a pretty strong support and a message sent to the FCA to say to the banks, people must have access to their cash. But GB News' political editor, Chris Hope, spoke to PM Sunak today. Have a listen to this.
We've got a campaign at GB News that there should be a legal right to access cash in shops. Do you support it?
Yeah, actually, while I was Chancellor, I put in place laws which have now passed which ensure that people do have access to cash, because I understand how important it is. Of course, we're transitioning and using more electronic money and doing more things online, but cash is important to people, particularly in rural communities like the one I represent. The new laws that we've now passed will ensure that people are not more than 3 miles away from having access to cash. The regulator, the FCA, will have new powers to fine or compel banks to provide those services to people, because we know how important they are. That's why we've passed a new law to make sure that it happens.
And in shops, though, have a right to pay for things in shops, not just banks, but in shops.
Well, I think it's right that people should have access to cash. Right. It's a different thing for the government to start imposing on individual businesses how they should do their business. I don't think that's appropriate. But what we can do is regulate the financial services industry so people do have access to cash themselves.
Oh, bravo. Well done, Prime Minister. So we can have access to cash. There's just no guarantee we can actually spend it. Because what you're saying is you don't necessarily think that shops or pubs or anywhere else should be obliged to take cash. What blooming use is it if you can get money out of the hole in the wall and you're not actually allowed to spend it? Maybe that's because the Prime Minister is going full speed ahead from 2030 for us to have the introduction of a central bank digital currency. Yes, we'll actually resemble communist China if we go down that route. In a moment, travel chaos. Far worse than the initial predictions of delays of 12 hours. Some people delayed for a week or more, perhaps in some cases even 12 days. And there's no compensation. In a moment, we'll find out why.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
So Martin Rolfe, who is the boss of the National Air Traffic Services, has told us today that if it happens again, if a major glitch happens again in the systems for aircraft taking off and landing, we can resolve it very, very quickly. So that's all right then. Nothing to worry about at all. Our digital world working beautifully. Well, initially we were told there'd be delays of hours. But there are some very, very serious delays out there. Days, even more than a week. I've even heard stories of up to 12 days. And one of those people, inconvenienced, is Gary Taylor, Company Director, stranded in Las Palmas on Gran Canaria. Gary, just tell us your story briefly, please.
I think the signal's gone, I can't hear.
Oh, I can hear you. Right, we'll get back to Gary, but joining me in the studio, there's always the risk of doing things down the line. Martin Sumners is Executive Director of the Association of Independent Tour Operators. So absolute blooming chaos this week.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Is this the worst we've known it?
Is it the worst we've known it? I don't think so. I mean, I think you've only got to look at sort of historically. Travel goes from one crisis to another. So
that's just the industry you're in.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've had ash cloud.
Yep.
You've had SARS. You've had the pandemic, and now we're back with an ATC glitch. But more recently, we've also had other glitches where the BA system's gone down.
Do other countries have problems with their national air traffic control systems in the way that we do?
So I can't comment on the way other countries work, but I know France, which is obviously the closest country to us, does tend to have sort of similar problems, but theirs tends to be around probably more around strikes than this.
Now, the interesting thing is there are people out there who are stranded, who are incurring extra hotel costs, whose cars parked at airports will incur extra charges, self-employed people who can't go back to work and earn any money. There will be some significant financial losses for some individuals out of all of this. And yet we're told that because these are extraordinary circumstances, there's going to be no compensation. Why? How? Martin, please explain.
So extraordinary circumstances is normally a catch-all to hide behind responsibility. Now there's two areas that you can look at. Obviously, having travel insurance is absolutely critical. Nobody should ever go away without ever having any travel insurance. Yeah. And I think one of the important things there to highlight is that we can't allow the insurers to hide behind extraordinary circumstances and say that they're not actually going to pay up. when competent.
So if people have got the right level of travel insurance, they should be okay.
Well, I would hope, depending on the policy, but because it is extraordinary circumstances, there's normally an element that they will try and wiggle out of. Now, but I think there is an opportunity for a solution here. We have been trying to communicate with government departments to suggest that what we need for travel to be able to sort of deliver refunds and compensation is to have a £1 levy per seat for every traveller that goes in and out of the country. Now, if you think of airlines, there's 300 million.
Yeah.
Sort of seats.
So the £1 levy would be there for the rainy day when things go wrong.
Yeah, and so that's exactly what I mean.
Interesting. Martin, stay with me. I'm going to attempt to go back to Gary Taylor. The company director is stranded in Las Palmas on Gran Canaria. Gary, back with you. Tell us what happened to you and how bad and how difficult is your situation?
Well, we arrived at the airport waiting to board our flight as usual. It was delayed initially for 1 hour, then 2 hours, then 3 hours. Then they said, we've got to go downstairs. Just absolute chaos. There was just hundreds of people, not knowing who to turn to, complete bedlam. A lady then came out and said, we've got to go and collect our bags. We got our baggage, and we was very quickly hustled onto a bus and brought to a very poor travel lodge, really.
And how long are you stuck there for, Gary?
Well, initially, we were supposed to fly home on Monday, and we was offered a replacement flight the following Monday, so 7 days.
Goodness me. And I suppose what you could say that there are worse places to be stranded than Gran Canaria.
Well, you'd say that, but I would really rather be at home. I've had my holiday. I've got no clean clothes, very little money left. What are we supposed to do?
Yeah, and have you had a look at your travel insurance to see, how much of this extra cost that you incur you're going to get back?
Well, we've spoken to the rep for the company that we flew out here with, and they've assured us that any out-of-pocket expenses will be covered, any reasonable expenses, obviously.
OK, so you're actually potentially, I'm just thinking about this, Martin Sumners, it sounds like Gary's perhaps in a better position than many others.
Well, I would say the reason that Gary is in a good position is because he's actually booked through a tour operator and no doubt through a travel agent, because any customer that operates independently, they're responsible for all of their own costs, whereas a tour operator is there to help you through all through whatever challenges that you might have, and therefore I can see that seems to be what's happening.
No, that's interesting.
What's happening with Gary?
So Gary, you're stuck till next Monday, is that right?
Well, luckily we've managed to get a slightly earlier flight on Friday, but we've got to go via Barcelona. We land in Barcelona at 8 p.m. and our flight back to Gatwick is not until 7 p.m. the next morning. 7 a.m. the next morning.
A.m. the next morning. Yeah, what a complete and utter bore. Gary, you're one of many stuck in this position, but thank you for coming on and sharing that story with us. Martin, going back a few years before the internet took over our lives, we would go down to the high street, we'd go to a travel agent, we'd sit down with somebody, have a cup of tea, get some advice on a holiday where we go, they'd book it for us, and we understood that. And there are still, of course, tour operators and travel agents out there, but I suspect we use them, but I still do use one, I have to say. But I suspect we use them less than we used to, because we simply go online and book all our own tickets and our own hotels. Are you saying we should still use these operators?
I'm most definitely saying that we should definitely still use operators, because at the end of the day, they are there to offer help and support when you need it. They can also offer expert advice that you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. I mean, I know there's all sorts of talk about AI being able to formulate various different ideas for holidays, but at the end of the day, you will never get the same advice that you can get from an expert that has visited a destination.
And if I go to a tour operator or a travel agent and I book a holiday, is it much more expensive by going through an agent?
No, it isn't. because at the end of the day, they are providing additional value that you can't get and the backup service that you will need all the way, all the way through your holiday. They are there, come as we've seen, rain or shine. That if somebody rings at 11 o'clock at night, there will be somebody through an emergency phone that will pick that call up. Whereas you will not get that through a soulless internet system.
And would that include advice on the right travel insurance to get?
Yes, it would do.
Well, whether it's right, Martin, that I've just allowed you to do this most extraordinary advertisement for every tour operator and an agent in the country, I don't know. But I have to say, it seems to make the most enormous amount of sense to me. Now, I wonder, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's a man who understands money and these things, Jacob, it sort of seemed to make sense, that, didn't it? That you book through an agent and you've got a bit more protection.
Well, and in a lot of cases, agents don't charge you any extra. They get a commission paid out of the same fee that you would be paying anyway. So people have to make a decision as to whether they're going for absolutely the lowest cost, the cheapest, and taking the risk for themselves and flying with Ryanair, or whether they want to pay a little bit more and have some extra protections. And that's a choice for consumers, and I'm strongly in favour of consumer choice.
Absolutely.
And then people take the risk and face consequences according to their choice.
Jacob, what have you got coming up on the show this evening?
Well, we're going to be starting on the Church of England, saying we're no longer a Christian country.
I know.
Because I think this is so defeatist that our whole history is a Christian
But of course,
history.
as a Roman Catholic, you love it in a way, don't you?
Well, I like the
Because the
Anglican
CME's
Church.
collapsing and people are defecting to you.
The return of Our Lady's Dowry, but that's not particularly what I'm going to be talking about. But I think we need to look at our history and understand that so much of our law, our constitution, actually Brexit, is in relation to our strong Christian heritage underpinning our constitution.
Jacob, I have to say, it does seem to me that the Church of England, our established church, in many ways has almost given up on its very own existence. Badly led, and as we well know, the fish rots from the head down. I'm not a Welby fan, but I think you knew that anyway, viewers. Let's have a look at what the weather has got in store for us.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the latest forecast from the Met Office here at GB News. Clear at first over the next 24 hours. Clouds then increase, rain spreading up from the southwest for many of us later on. We've got a gap in between weather systems for the time being, low pressure pushing into the North Sea, but the next low is on the way, bringing a series of weather fronts that will particularly affect Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest by the end of the night. Already the clouds are thickening across western areas through the evening and overnight. Clear spells for Scotland, central and eastern England at first, and actually quite a fresh feel here first thing Thursday with temperatures widely in the single figures. Not quite so fresh further west, where we've got the cloud keeping things a bit milder, and we've also got the rain moving in first thing. Some heavier pulses across parts of Northern Ireland during the morning, as well as Wales and the southwest. That rain slowly pushes into the rest of Wales, the Midlands, southeast England, but it largely avoids Scotland, where we just see one or two light showers in the afternoon, likewise for the north and northeast of England. Feeling warm where we do get some sunshine coming through, feeling disappointingly cool across the central slice of the UK, 16-17, where we've got the outbreaks of rain. Further rain to come across northern England into parts of North Wales, Northern Ireland during Friday.